today. We're going to mute ourselves for the feedback purposes. I want to thank everybody for coming today, both here at the American Center and online for our voting in U.S. elections. Thank you. So I want to thank everybody for coming, both here at the American Center and online, to our voting in U.S. elections information session. My name is Casey Gardner. I'll be the host for your event today. Just a couple of small housekeeping reminders. We are broadcasting the event live in a hybrid format online. But online folks, we actually can't see you in the room here, so it'll be important if you want to participate to put your messages in the chat. So don't unmute yourselves or share screen. We can't see you on the screen, but we do want to hear from you, and you can have those words in the chat, and my colleague will make sure we see it. And then for those of you here in the audience, when we get to the question and answer later, I may repeat the questions back so the folks online can also hear what the questions are. So before we dive into the content, I want to introduce our consul here at the U.S. Embassy, Sarah Cranston, has a few words of welcome.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming this afternoon. I got the chance to meet a few of you, and I hope I'll get to say hi to many more of you afterwards. As the U.S. Embassy, one of the values that we promote anywhere in the world that we have an embassy is democracy. And so it's really important to us to make sure that all of our citizens overseas are able to vote and are, informed about how to do that. So we're very lucky to have a great American Citizen Services team. Our local Czech colleagues are here. I'll just briefly introduce them. David.
Hello.
We have Lada in the doorway. And Lita there. So whenever you email or call, it's one of these friendly faces that is answering. They do an exceptional job, and it's just the three of them. So it's not a team of 10, or as many people imagine. So they are excellent and working hard for U.S. citizens. And we're also really lucky this year to have Casey, who has a lot of experience before he joined the State Department in running local polling. I'll let him tell you a little bit more about that, but we're just really glad that you're here, and I will turn it back over to Casey to get started.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. I also wanted to go ahead and thank our American Center staff. You can see them helping us arrange the event today and made it a success. We could not host this event at this scale and this magnitude without them. So I wanted to make sure to thank the American Center team. And then, of course, this is a magnificent space. You can see different photographs, different pieces of American culture available. That our primary audience in this space is the Czech population. But of course, you can see the different signs of America here. So thank you to the American Center staff and to the embassy for supporting our event. So I'm going to start by sharing a presentation. It will come on the screen behind me. And so for those of you watching at home, it will take away some of the visual of the speakers. Don't worry, we will be back later. We're checking my, that's share. That is not what we're looking for. It's this button right here, yeah. No check on that button. And so we're going to go through this presentation today. Our entire session is planned for about 45 minutes. Don't worry, there won't be 45 minutes of PowerPoint, but there is some material that I wanted to get out to you about the process of registering as an international voter. And then I have answers to some of the questions that many of you submitted in advance for the session. And then we'll have time for you to ask new questions as they come up today. Okay. So this is our agenda for our time together. I think we've covered the welcome, although there's one more slide for that. Then we're going to talk about registering to vote as an international voter, methods of returning your ballot, a couple case study examples of what this might look like, and then finally a question and answer period that we have for you today. We've already heard from Sarah. Thank you again, Sarah, for your introduction. You're going to hear a little bit more from me. And then, of course, we thank the American Center staff. And there are over 73 of you who RSVP'd for the event today, about half of you in person, another half online. And so cheers to all of you for joining us. You're the reason we're doing the event. Before we dive in on the specific requirements to vote, I just want to tell a little bit of a story about how I came to this field. So before I joined the State Department, I worked in higher education, but I actually got my start working in elections and working with voting when I was in high school. Where I went to high school, they had a program where high school students could work as local poll workers. And although I originally thought that was an exciting idea because I got the day off of classes, I immediately fell in love with a whole different element of the process. So I'm working as a poll worker in several counties in California, eventually to the rank of field inspector, and then later as a graduate student as a consultant for a county registrar of voters, working on vote by mail campaigns and how to make sure that all Americans exercise to vote and did so in an error-free way, which is one of the problems we're having in the county I was consulting with. So this has been an interest of mine for many years, and I'm really excited to get a chance to share it with all of you tonight. So registering to vote. Americans, by and large, have a right to vote, but there's a couple of things that you need to do in order to exercise that right. You need to be age 18 by the day of the election. So for those of you who sent questions in advance about whether 17-year-olds can register, depending on the state, they absolutely can and should, especially if the election is close to their birthday. You need to be registered in your district, and we'll talk about what your district means in the next slide, especially for those of you who haven't lived in the US for a long time or ever, in order to be eligible. The next thing you need to do is you need to be free of felony convictions or any legal restrictions. I'm not going to ask you about those right now in a public space, but if there's a legal issue that keeps you from being eligible to vote, you will have received a sealed court letter regarding your eligibility. So if you've never received any letter like that, you shouldn't have any legal problems regarding your right to vote. And then finally, you need to return the ballot by the election deadline. One of the challenges, and this is a theme we'll come to over and over in today's presentation, is that because the United States operates its elections on a state and sometimes even county level, there are many different rules that can come into play depending on what your voting district is. So in my home voting district in California, ballots that are simply postmarked by election day have to be counted. But there's no guarantee that the voting district that you are registering to vote in has the same rules. And so we'll talk about where to find those little wrinkles so that you can make sure that your vote counts. So let's talk about the mechanics. Before we actually go into registering to vote, I want you to consider about how you'd like to receive your ballot. How many of you live in a state where you can vote online? Well, there's at least one of you who's from Colorado who's mentioned that they voted online before, so you don't have to identify yourself now. But there are some states that allow you to vote online. There are many states that allow you to vote by mail, almost all now, and there are, of course, traditional in-person voting. Now, when you live outside of the United States, it's not possible for your state to open a polling place at the embassy. So I know some of you are dual nationals or have friends that are dual nationals who might vote at the local embassy. We don't do that. But we do have this program, FVAP. You'll see the different web address and different iconography around the room today that explains what your rights are to vote by mail in different parts of the world. Now, when I say consider how you'd like to receive your vote, fast forwarding later to the registration form, and I'll go over this a little bit in a moment, it's going to ask you what methods are most ideal for you to receive your ballot. If you say, I want to get it by email, and your state doesn't offer email, it's not going to come by email. So it behooves you to do a little bit of pre-research so that you're not asking your state to do something they're not going to do. So let's think about how we want to get the ballot. Second, we want to make sure we register for the state, and you'll see an important preposition here, and or fill out a FPCA card. This is the federal voting card. The reason for this is twofold. If you live in a state like California, Arizona, states that have a mail system that will mail you your ballot to an international address, you may not need to register with this individual card if you're happy registering with your state. And so every time I do outreach like this, I hear about someone who's been voting from abroad, whose state mails them their ballot, and it's not a problem. But if it's the first time that you're going to be voting abroad, you may want to fill out this card as an insurance policy, because if your vote doesn't show up, this gives you extra leverage to make sure that you can get a ballot submitted to the election. We'll talk about that a little bit more later, but I wanted to point that out here, because for some folks, especially if you have a family member that maintains your US address, the easiest thing might be to register to vote by mail at your home address that you use as your legal address in the States, and then that person simply forwards you your ballot here to the Czech Republic, and then you return it from the Czech Republic. So if there's the sort of like, if those of you in the audience are thinking, what's the simplest solution to get this done? For those of you who have those resources, that might be the simplest solution, but there are other manners that we'll cover. And the last one, make sure you check your registration dates. So every state will have a different, states have different days for their elections. That's a whole nother headache. Right? But then also every state has a different deadline for registration ahead of those elections. And although some states legally allow same-day voting, like California is another good example of that, that's for in-person. So you're not going to be registering same day and then voting by mail in a Californian election. So this is a really important concept to understand, your voting address. Probably a good 30–40% of the questions that we got ahead of this session were, I haven't lived in the US for a long time, there's somebody else living in the house I used to own in the US, I've never lived in the US myself, where do I register to vote? And so this website, the FVAP website, has a really great tool. I know there's a screenshot in low resolution here, but it's at their fvap.gov/citizen-voter, pretty easy address to remember, I think, that has a tool on how you can look up your voting address. We're looking for an address in the US that you have the strongest connection to. So perhaps it was your address in the US before you moved to the Czech Republic 5 years ago. Perhaps it was the address your parents resided in the US before your family moved to the Czech Republic or somewhere else and then subsequently here. So we're looking for the address that you have the strongest connection to. You do not have to receive mail at that address. You don't have to have ever lived at that address, but you choose that address because you have the strongest connection to it. So my wife and I, before we joined the Foreign Service, were originally from Sacramento. We're going to put our Sacramento address there, even though there's another family that lives in our home, for example, right? Any questions on that so far? That is a key concept. Yes, sir, and I'll repeat the question after you ask.
I have a driver's license registered in Virginia with my stepmother's residence. Would that be if I have a driver's license, Virginia driver's license? That's it? That's
a great way. Yes. So the question for those of you online was, the person asking the question has a driver's license at a Virginia address. That's their American address for their ID. That would be your voting address. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
I have a driver's license in Indiana, but all of my mail goes to our office in Missouri to get forwarded to me. Is it possible to do it, like be registered in one state and have it sent to a different state?
Yeah, so this is also, so the question for the folks online is, if I have an ID from living in one state and I have a mail forwarding address in another state, which state do I register in? I would recommend that you register in the state you have the ID from, because you're technically a citizen of that state, and using that address, whether you live there or not. These are great questions. When we look at these forms later, and I didn't pass them out for a reason, because I don't want you to take them if you're not going to use it, but there's a section on the form where it says, what is your voting address? And then there's a section later, which is, where do you live? For many of you, it's going to be, my legal address in Indiana, and then my mailing address in the Czech Republic, right? For many of you. Great questions. Thank you. So let's talk about returning ballots. So in a perfect world, you've registered with your Secretary of State, you've submitted the card if you feel you need to, you're registered, you get the ballot, right? Whether it's forwarded to you from a friend in the US, whether it comes in your email inbox, where it comes to your Česká pošta, wherever, right? It's here, it's in your hand, it's time to vote. You do your research, you fill out the ballot, you vote, you seal it up. Now, what are your options for getting it back to the United States? Well, the first way you can do it is you can just simply get an international letter and mail it back to its return address. Sometimes that can be costly, especially if you need to rush it, if you're running out of time or didn't come on time, but that is a simple, easy way to do it. The second way to do it is for official election mail, and you'll notice this election mail type insignia here. For official election mail, it can actually be mailed from the US Embassy. So if you just go slightly up the street here to the entrance to our embassy, you can let the guards know that you have official election mail to be mailed to the United States. There's a drop box just inside the door on the left. You simply put it in there. We often have I voted stickers on the top. You should take one of those, and then you're on your way. And so we will submit that to the United States because it's official diplomatic post. I know I talked to a couple of you before the event. What if you don't have an official, election mail ballot? Unfortunately, we're not able to forward regular post to the United States unless it's actual election mail. I realize that's inconvenient for some folks, and I apologize for that. Just have to follow the regulations of our post office. I'm going to come right back to you. I'm just going to finish the last two here. For those of you who live in states that have online voting, like a secure online voting platform, you can probably do the whole process there. I think we have some folks from Colorado on the call today that applies to. And then remember that many, both mailing services and secretaries of state, offer a ballot tracking service. So you can actually log in with your tracking number and find out when your polling place got your ballot. So it's kind of refreshing, right, to know that it made it and that it's been counted. And it's also great to test your return method. If you're voting up from abroad for the first time and you're like, oh, I don't know if I got to it, does the embassy really mail it? Well, yeah, you'll get it. You'll get a confirmation when you check it in the system. So those are kind of the 4 ways we recommend doing that. And we have more detailed instructions on all 4 of those methods on our fantastic American Citizens Services website. It's part of the embassy. So I'll now stop now and take your question, sir.
How does it work if I'm going to use the box at the American Embassy? And states have different delivery submission dates.
Yeah, so the question for those online is, can I use the box at the embassy if there are different dates for the election? The answer, and hopefully I understood your question, and if not, I'll give you a chance to ask again.
As an example, what happens if the vote needs to be submitted to state X by the 1st of November rather than the 8th of November?
Yeah, so
it's packaged for the whole series of others that are expected to go back by the 8th of November.
I think I better understand the question. And for those of you online, basically the question is, how often do we mail the ballots back to the US? Do we do it? The answer is all the time. So we're diligent, and Sarah helps us monitor the box too when we come in every day. And if there's a ballot in that box, we deliver it to the diplomatic post office to be mailed. Yeah. So at the diplomatic post office, it will be postmarked. That is a legal post office. So for those of you who are just starting to skate right underneath the deadline for submission, technically the stamp at the diplomatic post office is a legal postmark. So if you show up on November 8th to mail your ballot, that it will be postmarked by that date. I'm not advising you to do that, but technically that would be correct. And then we have another question.
Following up on Chip's question, how fast does it make it to the States, roughly?
Yeah, so the question from the audience is how fast does it get to the US? The answer is results may vary. We know this from our own correspondence, so sometimes they get there quite quickly and I'm surprised, and other times it does take a while. So that's another reason why submitting them earlier is better. But even if your ballot, like, once again, I'll use California as an example because I'm most familiar with them. If your ballot is postmarked by November 8th and they get it, 2 weeks later, they will still count it. But I would highly recommend you submit them earlier if possible.
One more question.
All right, one more question, then we're going to move to the next slide.
Where do I go to find out what methods of voting my state allows?
Great. So the question is, where do I go to identify the methods of voting my state allows? I'm going to go back one slide here. This overseas voter tool that I mentioned on the FEAP website is a really great tool that has the different deadlines, how to find your voting address, and the different registration instructions. The other way you can do that is you can go directly to your Secretary of State or magistrate's website if you're from a Commonwealth that explains that specifically for your state. So you can go to the Virginia one or the Maryland one, Washington, D.C., so on and so forth. You can actually find them there. So what are some common challenges? Well, one of the questions we often get in this work is, when will my ballot show up? How do I know if it's not coming? This is an existential question. We've all struggled with this. How do I know something's going to happen? Typically, you should expect your ballot about 45 days before the election. If 45 days before the election you don't have your ballot, I would start sort of noting that it should come in the next few days, or you might want to inquire to its status. What happens if it never comes? Well, one of the advantages of using the card system is it entitles you to a backup ballot that you can download from the website and submit. And so it guarantees your eligibility to vote. So a lot of voters will choose to register with their state and then also submit one of these cards to make sure that they don't run into a situation where they can't cast a ballot. Some states handle this in different ways. Some states will say, okay, your print ballot didn't show up, so we're gonna have you vote online. Some states will emergency rush you another ballot if the first one gets lost. But you know, after having worked in this for a long time, very, very, very few problems exist with mail-in ballots. I know that's an issue of some contention in the US. I'm not trying to get involved in that, but I do want you to know that this is very rare, that it's just not supposed to show up. But if you're concerned about that, you do have a method to protect yourself against it. When are my primaries? That's kind of similar to a question we just had, right? Like when is the next election in my state? So you can look that up on the voting tool or the Secretary of State website for your state. And then the last question is both the card and a regular voter registration for every state that I'm aware of will ask you if you have a party preference. So this, you know, common parties, Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Green, things of that nature. Just a reminder on these. You do not have to register as a partisan voter in the United States. So you do not have to select a political party. And if a form asks you what's your political party, you can fill in no preference. And that means you will not be registered in a political party. I would discourage you into ever registering as independent because there is a party called the American Independent Party. So if you register as an independent, you'll probably be registered as American Independent. It's an apolitical conversation today, but I would encourage you to look up their platform before you would register as an American Independent voter. However, every year we had folks at the Registrar of Voters who were upset that they got the wrong primary ballots. So depending on your state, you will be sent a slightly different ballot in a primary, depending on what political party you're a part of. So many years ago, when I first started doing this type of work, California had open primaries for Democrats and they had closed primaries for Republicans. So any voter could vote in the Democratic primary and only Republican voters could vote in the Republican primary. Now, California has now gone away from that system. Now we have a top two preference system. So all voters vote in all primaries and only the top two vote getters in the primary advance to the final election. There's, 50 plus one states, right? How you want to count Puerto Rico, whether your plus one's Puerto Rico or DC or whatever, right? So I don't know how it works in every single state, but it is important that if you're expecting to be voting in a primary, that you register for the right party to be voted in that primary. One of the challenges international voters have is if there's not usually time to re-register and get another ballot. So once your ballot shows up, that's your ballot. So it's not like being at home where maybe you could take it downtown, surrender it, and get another one. So do think about what party you want to be registered at, if any at all, when you do your registration. So I wrote a few examples here based on the questions we got before the event. So I'd like you to meet Rebecca from Arizona. She's registered to vote by mail at a family address in Arizona. Her parents mail her ballot when it arrives in Arizona to her address here in Czechia. And she decides to return the ballot to the ballot box in the US Embassy. She comes to Prague, pops it in the box, gets the sticker, and it's done. So that's one way you could do this. Here's Jamal from Colorado.
Can we add that she puts her own postage on that ballot in the box?
That is a really good point to add. So many election mailers come with the postage paid. The vast majority do, but there are states that require you to put a US stamp on your election mail. That's a gotcha, right? For those of you who are living abroad, how many stamps do you have in your house right now? US stamps. Yeah, you've got them, I saw you. So maybe what you want to do is when you get your ballot, take a look right at it and make sure it says postage paid, like this one does. And if not, it'll say, requires a stamp to be mailed. So please don't put unstamped things in our box. It's not like the embassy can't loan you 50 cents, but it's just very hard for us to do that. So it'll be much easier if they're properly postaged before you drop them off. So thank you, Sarah, for reminding me of that. That you think that's kind of a silly thing, but it happens, right? And then now we have someone's ballot, and yeah. So please do make sure they have the proper US postage. They don't need international postage. If they're in the election mail and they're in the embassy, we'll take it from there. Question.
Is there somewhere to get US postage here in Prague?
So I believe the answer to that is yes, but who knows the answer to that?
Well, we can buy them from
Yeah.
the Marines. I bet we could pass them on to you at the window if you like.
So if
Come
you're
in for an appointment and you're really hard up for a stamp, let us know. But
yeah, in an ideal world, right, this might be one of the supplies that, your family or friends send you from the US periodically with your Cheetos or, other things that need to be sent from the US. Yeah, if you get in a real fix where this is the thing that's keeping you from voting, please contact us and we'll try to solve that. The question was, forgive me, online audience, the question was, what do I do if I don't have a stamp? The corollary to that question, you just reminded me of it, is what do I do if I don't have a Czech address? And this actually came up with some of the university students I talked to a couple months ago. And there's a couple ways to handle that. You can get a Czech address from the post office, just through their process of being assigned a PO box. It's probably the safest and easiest no frills solution to that. The other solution, of course, is you can make a friend or have a family member in the Czech Republic and use their address for your voter registration. So a couple more examples. We have Jamal from Colorado, registered online and with the physical card, was mailed the ballot to the international address, returns it by international post to Colorado. Goes to the post office, gets an international envelope, costs a little bit more than a stamp, but it's on its way to Colorado. And then kind of a third one, we have George from Virginia, registered by physical voter card, submitted this, we have them in the back today. They're also online at the fvap.org website, good companion to the presentation, online audience. But George didn't get a ballot. The ballot didn't show up. No ballot from Virginia. So what George did is printed the emergency backup from fvap.org, mailed it to the U.S. Embassy using the instructions that you can mail from the Czech Post to our office, and then we forwarded it to the U.S. Then, this is the key information. If something goes wrong, right, because things go wrong, right? It's an imperfect world, it's an imperfect system. When things go wrong, you want to correct your information, right? Your Secretary of State does not want to be missing you, right? It's their mandate to try and get all eligible voters to vote. So if there's something wrong, the ballot doesn't come, it comes late, it's the wrong party, there's problems with submission, things like that, they want to know about that. Every registrar of voters I've ever seen has a troubleshooting team, and they want to know why those ballots aren't coming back. So if you run into problems, correct your information, you can resubmit it, and then never be shy about reaching out to them. They want to know what the bottlenecks are. If you don't tell them, then they don't know that they have a problem in their registration system. So we've been doing some questions and answers as we've gone. We have some other collateral here. I've mentioned the website a number of different times. We have some reference material that I'm not ready to give out, but we could look at the end of the presentation. And then we have some pamphlets, and you can get your own voter registration card along with a cool pen on the back there where the water is at the table. These are just some reminders of where you might get extra information about your registration status, whether it's your Secretary of State, County Registrar of Voters, or of course our voter assistance information here at the embassy. I think now's a good time if there's any questions that have come up. All right.
Actually, one. Yeah, I will read it.
All right, question from the chat.
If my last US driver's license was in a state where I never lived, but my parents did, should I register to vote there, even if the driver's license is expired?
That's a great question. So I know that everyone in the audience heard it. I just want to let the folks online know that this is the question about the expired driver's license in the chat. So I'm going to sidestep my first question, which is how you got a driver's license from a state you've never lived in. I'm going to sidestep that. I'm going to sidestep that for now. So assuming you are a citizen of the state of which you have an identification, whether you've lived there or not, or whether your parents still live there, that would be your voting address unless you have an address with a stronger tie. So let's say you, a few years later, you move to another state and, you live there for several years, but you never got another ID. I would probably go with I'd probably stick with the state that you have the ID from. But to be honest with you, they're relying on you as an overseas voter to tell us where your voting district should be. So there's, if somebody ever looked into this, there should be something connecting you to that address, right? If somebody really investigated this and wanted to make sure you weren't voting fraudulently, maybe there's some income related to that. Maybe there's a car registered there, things of that nature. So if you have an ID in a state that was valid, even though it's expired now, it doesn't really matter. I would go with that. It's a good one. It's a good question.
Somebody comment in the chat.
There is a comment. Can you see it?
I can, but is it good? Can we have it?
It's an update on the process in Colorado.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we're gonna hear about the process in Colorado from the chat.
Just to update your Colorado slide, the whole process is done online. After you fill out the ballot, you can either submit it by email or submit the hard copy. What is nice about emailing the ballot is that if you make a mistake, the Secretary of State notifies you within 24 hours and you can resubmit them.
Oh, well, I'd like to thank the person that made that comment in the chat. That's some extra information for me. And, that sounds wonderful, especially for you overseas voters, right? That, the ability to submit the vote online and not have to worry about moving back and forth with the paper could be a good option. I don't know if we have any other Colorados in here, or maybe we have future Coloradans in here now. I don't know. I'm not sure. This presentation was not endorsed by the Colorado Development Corporation. But thank you very much for reading that, and then also for the comment in the chat. So any consular presentation from the U.S. Embassy wouldn't be complete if I didn't just take a moment to remind you of the things that we have available for you at the U.S. Embassy. So the first thing I want to do is remind you about STEP, the Smart Traveler Enrollment Program. I think I'm seeing some nods in the audience. Many of you know about that. That's probably how you might have gotten the message for the event today, but also useful when you travel around. You get the latest advice from us on travel advisories, contact information in countries, things of that matter. We are also your location to renew your U.S. passport. We have information on our website about how that can be done by mail, in person, and also for emergency services. We also offer notarials, reports of births abroad. We've talked about the voting mailbox. And of course, a big part of what we do in the consular section is interview non-U.S. nationals for visas who want to visit the U.S. or live there permanently. So it's just a reminder of all the great work that our team does and all the different services that are available to you as Americans living in Czechia here at the embassy just down the street. Sarah, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think your presentation was excellent. I noticed on the previous slide we had fdap.org and it should be gov.gov. So I just want to make sure that everybody sees that online. Here. I know, are you opening for more questions or should I say a final? Go ahead.
Yeah, so before we get to the final thank yous, I did want to open up the group if they have any more questions. And then, of course, we do have a little soft time left in the program if you want to look at the cards and things like that while we're here. So any other questions? I'm going to go here and then I'll get to you.
Can you just talk through the process again for somebody who was born here and has never lived in the States?
Got it. So the question from the audience, steal that. So the question from the audience was, can you walk through the process again if you're an American citizen who's never lived in the United States, whether you were born in the Czech Republic or born in another country? So the key is to identify that voting address. Is what is the address in the United States that you have the strongest connection to? It might have been where your parents lived before they emigrated or before they visited out of the country. It might be an address of a family member. It probably shouldn't be a business or anything unless that was like a family-owned business or like something like that. Grandparent would also work, especially if the parents didn't have a US address. Yeah.
I think I got it, but I want to get it straight. I have my driving license and everything in North Carolina, but my daughter moved in North Carolina, but it's another place. According to you, it doesn't matter, I can use the address I have until now. I have a voting registration card. I was looking for it today all day and I can find it.
Yeah.
So do I need that to, or just doing this it will suffice?
Great. So thank you for the question. The question is, if I have an ID and an established legal residence in one state, do I need to update it? Do I need to provide a voter registration card? Do I need to document it? The short answer is no. Is that you're ready to go. And so your voter registration cards that you get in the mail, those are like a confirmation from your voting authority that they have your registration.
Yes.
And so when you submit a new registration or a voting card, this just goes on top of it. This just supersedes it. But this is a really great moment to mention that if you start relying on this card, let's say you're living in your voter residence is in a state that it's just not, this doesn't seem easy, that the voting's not going to happen. You really want to rely on the backup or the federal protection, that you do want to do this each year. And that's something that's in sort of small print on the bottom of the card, but I just want to highlight for everybody in the audience, is that if you're relying on the federal voting protection, you do want to renew it every year. I often get sighs from audiences like, oh, that sounds like a lot. It only takes a minute to fill this out. But they want you to do it every year because if there's changes in your voting status, they want to know that.
Okay, I'm not going to be in Prague next year.
So
I don't know where I'm going to be, but I'm going to get another card again.
yeah, so maybe this is good for the soft time too. We can talk a little bit more about your situation, but that was just a reminder about these cards. If this is a key part of your voting strategy, every year. Okay.
Every election you vote,
Every year, every calendar year.
regardless whether you vote or not.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's very common, by the way, for voting authorities to take not voting in an election as a sign that that voter is inactive. And so there are some states that will actually take you off the voting rolls if you miss an election or if you miss 2 in a row. So it is important, right? Going back to the idea, if there's a problem, say something, right? Because you don't want to be taken off and say, oh, I just didn't get it last time. And now you're never going to get it again unless you take action. So there's a handful of questions. We had a patient person over here, and then I'll get the new hands. Yes.
To follow up with the gentleman in the front about registry, my daughter is 17. She doesn't turn 18 until the very end of August. She cannot do anything until her birthday. Is that correct?
I'd have to just double check with the state that she's registering. Oh, she can register.
She can register before 18?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because my concern was if you register at the very end of August, with all the bureaucracy, to get the ballot in time is living here, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
Okay, so she can register now, get everything done, and it will.
Exactly. And I'm just going to repeat that for the online folks. But the question was, is a 17-year-old whose birthday in August happens to be living in California, can they register now so that they get their ballot before the election? We have a little insider knowledge of California here, so it's easy for me to give you a quick yes, but you can check with your state of residence if a similar situation applies to you. Yes, so they can register in advance of their 18th birthday as long as they'll be 18 by the time the election is, and then California should mail them the ballot out. I haven't had any problems with my California registration came here. And there were a couple other hands, but I might have answered them. Yeah, please. Right behind you. Yeah.
So if you have to do that card every year, where do we get it?
So you can get it from us here. So the question is, if I have to do the card every year, or I want to renew the card every year, where do I get it? We have some in the back of the room today. You can take more than one. But we also have them here at the U.S. Embassy at American Citizen Services. And you can also download a form of this online, and it comes with the postage paid. So that's, once again, the website. It is .gov, not .com. That's my fault. But yes, that has a copy of the registration card.
But you can't submit that card online. You gotta mail it.
I do believe they have an online submission, so that's good news. For some reason, I like the cards. I don't know.
That's cool. That's cool.
For some reason, I would recommend the card.
I will answer that. You can, it depends on the state.
Yeah.
Most states will allow you to do it online.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about submitting the voter card, not the voter registration. And this is where it just like it gets hard to do, right? Because there's all these different states with their different rules and different registrations. So what's great about the physical card is that it's the silver bullet, right? It's like you got the physical card, you mail it in, federal protection. And then, yeah, there's other ways to submit that information, whether it's online directly with the state or on the website. Yeah. We'll go here and then we'll come back.
Is there a date that we have to, I know it's every year, but it's a specific date that we have to mail it before that?
So the question is there a specific date that we would mail the FVAP card before the election? The answer is no. You can mail it on January 1st and then you're covered for the rest of the year.
Okay.
Yeah, so the question is, if you don't have a state ID, you just have a voting address but no ID, what do you put on the state ID line? I would leave it blank because it's asking for a specific piece of information. And then where it says what additional information can you provide, I put your US passport number there if you don't have a state ID. It's not a requirement to have a state ID to vote in many states. It is a requirement to know your voting address. Yeah. Any other questions from our online audience?
No.
Okay. Well, you have been a wonderful audience. On behalf of the entire embassy, our American Citizen Services crew, the American Center, I want to thank you all for joining us, both here face-to-face and online. And we do have some soft time at the end of the event if you have any follow-up questions for us, but I think I'm going to call it an official end after Sarah says one last thing. It's like a magic orb.
I just want to say that joining the State Department or working for an embassy does not make you an expert on these things. So it's confusing to me. We're so lucky to have Casey with this vast wealth of knowledge. And so thank you so much, Casey, for explaining this and breaking it down for us and answering a lot more questions, I'm sure, in the next few minutes. So thank you.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, Sarah.